One definition of the word experience is an event or series of events participated in or lived through. Well, this film seeks to relive some of the events or personal memories of one Isle of Wight town, Shanklin. Still vividly recalled by some people are those years of hardship and tragedy in World War II. Remembered with more fondness by residents and visitors alike are post-war events when this seaside town strove with some success to regain its proud role as a holiday resort. Its attraction was even recognised by Attlee's post-war Labour government, which chose this manor house guest house, then run by the Workers' Travel Association, for a weekend away with the cabinet.
I remember in 1949 the Labour cabinet at the time came down to the manor in Shanklin for a weekend. I was lucky enough to be invited up because my father knew Nye Bevan. My father knew Nye from the valleys of Wales where they were growing up, and it was Nye actually who surprised my father by knowing him in the crowd, and he brought us together and we had a few photographs. There's a picture of the whole family there with the actual cabinet itself, and a little later on Nye himself came home and he had tea with the whole family. What an exciting man to be with in those days.
Shanklin is the scene of the year's big political mystery, what's brewing at the old manor house. The 17th century mansion, now a Workers' Travel Association guest house, is under police guard as a Pathé cameraman takes these pictures of Labour's secret conference. Ministers and party chiefs are in holiday mood. Herbert Morrison's there, and Noel Baker, Commonwealth Secretary, Scotland's Arthur Woodburn, and Party Secretary Morgan Phillips. And now in Bevan's, a picture of nationalised health. Returning from Shanklin's village church, we spot Sir Stafford Cripps, who's rumoured to be cutting prices. Before getting down to business, the Ministers of Labour and Education enjoy the climate in the manor grounds. Manny Shinwell prefers to be alone. Dr. Summerskill, casting bread on troubled waters, still can't tell butter from Marge. The government's first 11, including Food Minister Strachey, who can't catch for de-rationed toffee apples, are training for the Wembley of politics, the general election. What their play will be, no one's allowed to know, yet. While Britain looks on, ministers are joined by Foreign Secretary Ernest Bevin before the secret session begins. The party conference in June will decide how Labour will conduct its great campaign for re-election. Meanwhile, Prime Minister Attlee and company find Shanklin is oh so bracing. There must be something in the air.
Two postscripts to the Labour cabinet visit caused some amusement among the townsfolk, generally not noted for their support of the Labour Party. The manor ran out of glasses and didn't have enough for the guests. They had to borrow some from the local Conservative club. And with meat rationing still in force, Shanklin's Food Control Committee recommended there should be a prosecution over the amount of bacon supplied by the manor. Just months after Shanklin briefly became an unofficial seat of government, it was involved in an Isle of Wight car rally.
Arriving at Cowes for the last stage of the first rally ever held in the Isle of Wight, more than 90 cars approached the real business of the competition. With 600 miles behind them, ahead are some tricky driving tests, a timed hill climb on a corkscrew hill, and a number of checks to pass through. On through lovely Shanklin. The beauty about rallies is that if you're not particularly interested in the motoring, the scenery is so attractive, if you've time to notice. Cars are standard road models. It's not a race, though the hill climb in which the principal award was won by Wood in a Jaguar is decided on time. The outright winner of the rally was Ridley in an MG. At Sandown, braking is one of the tests. Gosh, son! As a test of the reliability of a car, rallies help to build the car of your dreams. It's just unfortunate that for most of us, so far as cars are concerned, Britain these days has become the Isle of Wight.
And the famous Cowsbourne television presenter Cliff Mitchell-Moore must have tempted many people to holiday in Shanklin by giving his distinctive voice to a promotional film for the Isle of Wight Tourist Board.
The sun shines longer in the Isle of Wight than anywhere else in Great Britain. To the north of Sandown and Shanklin, Culver Cliff cuts off the wind, and these twin resorts lie side by side, looking to the southeast and always into the sun. And if you didn't believe that the English Channel could look like the Caribbean, then take another look, for this is really how it is. No need to exert yourself unduly. At Shanklin, they even provide a lift to take you down the cliff side. But no wise man would pick sides between Shanklin and Sandown. The sand is golden, the water is warm, the bathing is safe for everybody. Don't do anything. Just sit there or float or paddle or swim or soak in that sunshine. The sands you lie on and throw away all the cares of your working year stretch for several miles through Sandown Bay. And it's clean sand, fine golden sand, warmed through by months of sunshine, washed by the cleanest, bluest water you could wish for. If you want to stir yourself from your dream in the sun, you can bob about a bit on a private joyride of your own. But you don't need to do anything energetic. Just stand there. And when you've had your exercise, you can just lie back on the sand and let your eye wander a little. There's always something to look at. They have so much sun in Shanklin and Sandown that you may find it a pleasant change to cool off in Shanklin Chine nearby, a huge wooded cleft in the hills where the trees run down to the sea. And while in Shanklin, stroll around the old village where the thatched roofs and the half-timbered walls lie quietly in the sunshine as they have done for centuries, before seaside holidays were ever dreamed of.
The former sports television presenter Dickie Davies can recall the days he spent as a small child in Shanklin before and during the war, when he attended Shanklin Church of England Primary School.
It's all changed since 1936, because that's when I was a pupil at this school, until about 1939. But it has no change. There was no pool in those days, and we just used to spend time in the playground, and if we were very lucky, we'd be selected to go and work up in the allotment, look after the plants and look after the vegetables and things. But it takes me back. It's such a long time ago now, since 1936 and 39, but it's wonderful to be back and seeing all the kids, the young kids, enjoying themselves and having the very best of conditions here, because it's a lovely little school.
Dickie lived with his parents a short step from the town centre in a detached house in Collingwood Road.
I'm sitting in the garden of Collingwood, which is the house in which we lived in the 30s, 1937 onwards until just after the war started. It was a lovely house. Well, it still is a lovely house, and mind you, it was the first time I'd seen a bathroom, because we moved from London in those days in the 30s, and we lived in basements and outside toilets, but this was lovely. And we turned it into a boarding house in the summer, and I used to sleep sometimes in the conservatory around the corner there, or sometimes under the kitchen table, just to make sure that we had enough bedroom space for the guests who stayed here. But a happy days, and I used to walk from here, Collingwood Road, up to the school that we've seen already. So many happy memories come flooding back. And I can remember my mother and I lived here because my father was on board ship in those days, and he was at sea. and in malted convoys in those days. And I remember that the people next door said to my mother, if you've got a real problem with the air raids, just come and live with us, come stay with us. And so that's what used to happen. There was a hedge, and when the when the siren went with the alarm, we used to dive through the hedge. My mother made a hole in the hedge, really, and go next door. And then the all clear would sound, and then we were back in. And my brother, he was so nervous in those days, and so really it was in, I think, late 40 or 41 that we left Collingwood to go back on the mainland. But it's lovely to spend those few hours today looking and reminiscing on the old days that we had in Shanklin.
A long annual tradition in the town is the carnival, as we can see with this news film made in the summer of 1939, just months before the outbreak of war.
At the Isle of Wight's famous summer resort, anybody who is anybody is out to welcome this year's Carnival Queen, Miss Kay Rayner. And Kay is to be crowned by the island's oldest inhabitant, aged 79. Very nice work. And now, Kay, how about a little kiss? What a lucky man. Does it feel good? And if you want to know how really lucky he is, take a look from his angle. And then it's all the fun of the parade.
Two people closely involved in carnivals in more recent years were the Carnival Queen from 1968 and someone who for many years served on the local carnival committee.
19 years old, and I was talked into entering Shanklin Carnival Queen by Anne Carter, who was a well-known local beauty queen. She went in for Miss Great Britain. I went in for it and I came second, runner-up to Mrs. Doreen Needham. Made great friends with her and Rosemary Cooper, who was the other maid of honour. We had a great time, really lovely time, and the people looked after us well. Come Carnival Day, we were there in all our regalia. Cars picked us up and took us down to the county ground. In those days everything was held at the county ground. And we took our places on the platform. Doreen was crowned by Felix Bonus, who was one of the comedians in the local show. I don't know whether he's still going, but he was a little while ago. We had a great time, and then a little spot appeared in the sky, and we were all getting a bit excited because we knew that little Nellie, who was the gyrocopter that was used in the James Bond film, was being brought to the island, and we all thinking ourselves lucky that perhaps James Bond might be with it. No such luck. No such luck. It was, I think, the designer of it flew it in, I believe it was a Wing Commander Wallace. And it did a few circuits and landed, and we were duly had photographs taken. And that was the start of the carnival day. The route in those days went down through the High Street, Regent Street, Wilton Park Road, Sandown Road, down to the county ground. So it was quite a long procession. That year that I was maid of honour, there was about 30 floats took part. The second year, 1968, the lady that was the Carnival Queen, Doreen Needham, in '67 talked me in again to going in for Carnival Queen. That year I won it. So there was me sat up there with this lovely crown on, being Carnival Queen. Felix Bonus crowned me again, second time. And he was a lovely man, he really was, so funny. And Dr. Kidd, I think, was the president of the Carnival Association in those days. And he took me on the dodgems and on the chair planes, and when he came off he looked a bit ill and thought he needed a doctor. But that again was a great day. And in those days it was 3 days, I think, because we had the fireworks on the Thursday as well down at the county ground.
Yes, in the 1950s, I think it was 1950s, we joined the Carnival Committee, which was quite a big committee in those days. And we used to have meetings and then we organised everything. I got a lot of fun out of being on the Carnival Committee, and we had a very good committee. You know, the members were all very nice and we all got on well with each other. It was quite hard work, and of course we had to raise the money for it as well. And then we used to have an evening when they chose the Carnival Queen and another one for the Carnival Princess, usually at the Channel View Hotel. We used to have that, and they used to choose them. In those days, I think the young ones were quite keen to do it, but nowadays they're not quite so keen. It was very difficult to get people. Yes, as soon as we finished organising, or as soon as the carnival was over, we had to start all over again.
Lots of good memories of that. When my aunt passed away, the fittings were taken from the shop and we had all the paperwork that related to the original fitting, and the cost of fitting all those mahogany shelves and cupboards and drawers was £210 and 10 shillings. And I believe those fitments are still in a museum up the country. I'm not quite sure where, but they were beautiful. Today they would cost a fortune.
Solicitor John Matthews, the Isle of Wight coroner, has enjoyed close family links with Shanklin, even marrying the daughter of a local vicar.
My earliest memories of Shanklin, I did not live there myself, date back to the late 1940s, when I was a very young child, when we used to visit my grandparents every weekend. My grandfather and grandmother lived in Clarendon Road, and we would usually travel by train from Ryde St John's to Shanklin Station, but as time went on we tended to go on the bus more. I was fascinated by double-decker buses as a child, and outside my grandparents' house the buses used to assemble long before there was a bus station, and so I could see all the buses outside the house just across the road, and with all their numbers on and the places where they were going to go to. Eric Carpenter, who was the close friend of my father, he was a builder, well-known firm which still exists, and he was also at one time chairman of the Sandown-Shanklin Urban District Council. But apart from that, he was also the station officer at Shanklin Fire Station. And in 1953, soon after the fire station was newly built, when I was 10 years old, he took me to the station, put a large fireman's helmet on my head, put an axe in my hand, and then lifted me into the driving seat of one of the brand new fire engines, which was of course gleaming red. Nobody else was present in the station at the time. It was just him with me there, and that's a memory that's always lasted with me. I went to Sandown Grammar School in 1954. Both my parents went there in the 1920s. My father from Shanklin, my mother from Sandown. And so when I was at school, there were quite a number of children with me in my intake whose parents were at the same school 30 years before. And of course a large number of the children at Sandown Grammar School would have come from Shanklin. It was the local grammar school. It served a catchment area from Ryde to Ventnor, but Shanklin and Sandown were probably where most of the children came from. My closest friend at school was Peter Scott, who lived in Green Lane, and his family were members of St Paul's Shanklin, where my grandmother went after she was widowed. And incidentally, Eric Carpenter was the church warden. In 1953, a new vicar arrived, the Reverend Leslie James Todd, with his wife and 2 daughters, and settled in a new purpose-built vicarage because the vicarage had been bombed during the war. When I was about 17, went into the choir occasionally because I had a girlfriend in the choir as well, and Peter was in the choir, so I often sang in that choir. Mr. Todd left St Paul's Shanklin in 1963, and some years later, in 1968, I married his younger daughter, Stephanie.
Brian Scovell is an islander who became a top sports writer for the Daily Sketch and the Daily Mail, covering football and cricket matches in 88 countries. He's written 25 books, the latest his autobiography. Born at St Lawrence, he first wrote for Ventnor's Isle of Wight Mercury while still at school, and later was a full-time reporter on Shanklin's Guardian. In his long Fleet Street career, he rubbed shoulders with all the top sports personalities, plus Prime Ministers and even Princess Diana.
I got a tip-off that The Guardian was looking for a successor to Bill Miller, their young reporter, who has just been appointed a job in the Boston Globe, I think. And so I went to see the editor of the Isle of Wight Guardian, Gordon Saunders, who was a rather tall, thin, not a friendly man, but he looked at my cuttings and said, "Oh well, you've obviously got a lot of potential." So they signed me up on a 4-year contract, which at the time I thought was a good move, but later on, of course, after a couple of years, you want to move on. But it was tremendous experience because I'd be there working all day long and night, and the paper, I would imagine it's about 8,000 words each edition, and I was probably knocking out about 5,000 myself. I used to go to this one at Shanklin Theatre, to their shows, the one at Sandown. I reported on the lift here when it was open. Met a lot of stars here. Tommy Trinder, the chairman of Fulham, who I later got to know quite well because he loved having a chat. Well, most Mondays I would spend a lot of time sitting in the Shanklin Pier Theatre watching Sheila Hancock and her husband Alec Ross, and I used to interview them. She was a very nice lady, and she was almost as young as me, I think, but she had this great sort of stature, and actually I didn't know that she'd come from the Isle of Wight until recently.
Brian's lifelong love of cricket not only manifests itself by watching the game, but also playing it, despite some occasional disasters at the crease. While on The Guardian, Brian played for Shanklin Cricket Club in the annual Cricket Week.
I used to, well, the ground was tennis courts before, and where the pitch, there's a sort of rise 11 yards behind. So I used to, because with a stiff leg, you don't want to walk going down a sudden slope. So I had to start my run from the 11-yard mark. And really, when I was bowling reasonably quick in those days, 11 yards was not really long enough for a run. But it suited me, and I can't remember who it was, but one of the Hampshire players told me how to hold the ball for a swing. And actually Roy Marshall, I played against him at Shanklin at one of these charity games, and he was one of the great players, Roy Marshall. If he'd been playing for England, he'd be an absolute star. And he opened the batting in this game, and the first ball, it was slightly wet, the pitch, and it pitched sort of middle and off and swung in and then left him. Really good ball. And Roy Marshall shouted out, "Well bowled, sir. Son." Anyway, the next ball hit like a rocket. And the next over, he hammered me all over the place, but it was a big thrill to get the ball past the bat of such a great player. Okay. In 1956, after Jim Laker took 19 wickets at Old Trafford, and I used to listen to the commentaries, And I discovered from, I think it was someone who knew someone of the staff at the Cliff Tops, as it was then known, and he said, oh, Jim Laker's here, staying a quiet holiday to get away from the fuss. So I went round to see Jim Laker and his wife Lily, who was a very nice Austrian lady. But when I arrived at the Cliff Top Hotel, I thought he might not want to speak. So I approached him and said who I was and whatever. And actually he's a decent bloke, Jim, typical Yorkshireman, but laconic, very laconic. So we sat down and I just spent about 10 or 15 minutes with him, but he said that he didn't want the whole of Fleet Street chasing him, and so we wrote a little piece there, England's hero spends a few days in Shanklin, and it wasn't really blown up at all. It should have been, but...
Anxious to eventually further his career off the island, Brian wrote to no fewer than 150 regional newspapers.
The Wolverhampton Express and Star, they wanted me, so I left the Guardian here, this paradise, to the Black Country in Wolverhampton, and it was a bit of a shock, I can tell you. But again, it was a very good experience, and well, I was very lucky that I met some really good guys working with and against me in Shanklin for the local paper. Lou Grant was one who died not so long ago at Sandown, and we used to go to these matches, and he used to go by bike, and he was one of these guys who would check everything 10 times. And they were very lucky in this part of the world to have someone like him to spend all that time working for so many years. And Ted Findon, who was the editor of the Chronicle, a brilliant, lively guy who was good for the game as well. And there was a lady called Joan Dodds, who was the daughter of the editor, Gordon Saunders. She was the news editor, lovely lady. She let me do what I liked, basically, under no restraints at all. And it was a good experience to work in this sort of area, where a great place to go, meeting all these famous people, and it enabled me to play a lot of sport as well. Well, one of my best friends is Maurice Leopard, because I first met him at Ventnor when we played table tennis, and I was the secretary of table tennis, and I was secretary of the tennis club as well, and we used to travel all over the island playing in these tournaments, and he was very keen. He wanted to go to Fleet Street as well, but he joined a paper in Hampshire, I think, and his roots were very deep here in the Isle of Wight, and he wanted to come back and work for the county press. And he was a good loyal servant, a good man, and he still does odd bits. He's quite a good wicket-keeper as well. His brother was even better.
The biggest single post-war event came in 1965 when the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh paid an official visit to the Isle of Wight.
My recollection of the Queen's visit in 1965 related to the Esplanade. My mum and dad had a cafe on Hope Beach called Journey's End, where we all worked. And when we knew that the Queen's visit was due, we closed the cafe, and as there was no one else on the beach because everyone was looking for the Queen, and we walked along to the lift to watch the royal procession, as it were, come down, to watch the games, and it was all very interesting. One of my recollections was the beautiful toilets that were erected for the Queen's visit, which apparently were never used. Unfortunately, they didn't leave them there, and I think we could do with them about now, as the council are busily closing toilets.
1965, we had the Queen's visit to the island. She came over to install Earl Mountbatten as the governor of the island, and it was a visit to Shanklin, which was greatly anticipated in those days. I worked in Mapes, the cake shop in Regent Street. She came to Shanklin in the afternoon, so we had to sort of quickly shut the shop, and I think all the other shops in Regent Street did the same thing, because I remember a lot of us shop workers and girls all belting up Regent Street down to the Old Village to watch the Queen come through from Ventnor. She came up through the Old Village and turned into Chine Avenue. I do remember how lovely she looked, almost illuminated. She had a lovely coral pink coat, and hat on, and the top of the car had us like a sunshine roof, so we could all see her well, and she was beautiful, and we all remarked on what a lovely, lovely skin she had. But she whizzed past us and she was gone in a second, and then she went onto the lift at Shanklin and down onto the front.
Shanklin was the next place to be honoured by the royal visitors, and the bright holiday town, with its twin resort, Sandown, a little way along the coast, must have been almost praying that they'd be able to live up to their famous sunshine record. Since the installation ceremony at Carisbrooke Castle in the morning, the Queen had been attended by Earl Mountbatten in his new capacity as governor. It was, as everyone agreed, the happiest possible first official duty that he could have performed in the island. At Shanklin, the royal visitors were received at the entrance to the top of the lift, which carries people up and down the cliff continuously for 15 hours a day in the summer season. Today, the Queen was to make a descent that's been experienced by thousands of holidaymakers. For Earl Mountbatten, Shanklin is a place of great significance. It was here that Pluto, the famous pipeline under the ocean, entered the sea to pump fuel supplies to the Allied invasion forces as they started fighting their way back into Europe after the D-Day landings. The pattern of the invasion had been set by Earl Mountbatten when, as Chief of Combined Operations in 1942 and 3, he set up Britain's first regular amphibious force, with headquarters at Cowes, and he insisted on some way being found of getting fuel across to France. Thus, Pluto was devised, and at the bottom of the cliff at Shanklin, a plaque commemorates the fact. It provided an additional source of pride for the Shanklin Guard of Honour.
And what about this place, Shanklin Theatre? Comedy actor Melvin Hayes, who's made his home on the island, is no stranger, having performed at a stage version of the popular TV series It Ain't Our Fault, Mum.
Do you know, my memories of working in this theatre are amazing. Nothing's changed, absolutely nothing. I mean, the empty teacups are still there. No, not seriously. It was a very nostalgic feeling because came by here today and there's people wandering into the theatre. It's an open day here, and to see the faces of people, elderly people, have obviously, when we were here 30 years ago, Winter Davis and I were here 30 years ago, there's the picture there, and to see these people, they probably came here as kids, but, and I remember, and while I was here, I thought one day I'm going to come back to this island because I'd like to live here, and it's so nice to think that we've got a theatre that now is on its feet again and it's on its way up. Fabulous. Funny enough, the show we did here that summer, those 30 years ago, Sink or Swim. And at the time, Windsor and I, we were doing It Ain't Our Fault, Mum, travelling backwards every day, getting up 6 o'clock in the morning, getting the hovercraft over, going up, rehearsing in London, leaving London 4 o'clock, getting here for the evening show. It ain't our fault, Mum. And your local reporter here, I remember, must have hated the show, because he said his headline was, It Ain't Half Rot, Mum. Wonderful comic with us called Frank Marlborough, who was a very funny man. I don't remember a lot about the show. All I remember that it was very, very clean. I mean, the rudest line in the entire show was when Matron says to Windsor, as we arrive at this health clinic, and he says, she says, how do you do? I haven't had the pleasure. And Windsor says, neither have I. We did 9 weeks here at this theatre, 9 weeks 30 years ago, and booked to come here during that same time, I suppose, following us or before us. Norman Wisdom was booked to do a month. Frankie Howard was booked to do a month. Leslie Crowther was booked to do a month. Nowadays, I don't know, people can't fill theatres for one night maybe, but to sort of do one season of 3, it doesn't happen anymore. I mean, there used to be the wonderful show on at Sandown on the pier there. I remember that. It's a shame. I live in Ryde, very near a theatre there, and that's all closed down. So it is very exciting to see this place open. And what I love to see is the people coming here for the one-nighters. I mean, Joe Brown. I mean, wonderful. There's a picture of Joe Brown coming to this theatre. I've never seen such a tired-looking man. And I look down the list of these one-nights he's doing, and there's thousands of them all over the country. But he's worth a visit. At the same time, it's It Ain't Our Fault, Mum, and I can tell you a true story. there was this show that he was involved in writing, and it was called Some Mothers Do Have 'Em. And people used to get the titles mixed up. You know, it ain't half what mum, some mothers do have 'em. And a woman actually said to me, I love that show of yours. Some mothers don't half like it hot.
The well-respected actress Sheila Hancock was born at Blackgang, where her parents ran a pub. She has rather mixed memories of performing in rep at Shanklin, as she explained when opening a local art festival.
Many years later, at the beginning of my acting career, I worked at the Shanklin Town Hall. I did 2 seasons with Barry O'Brien's rep in the 50s. And we did terrible Agatha Christie's and farces and things like that. And I remember it was a frightfully dreary place. It really was. When you came over in that ferry, you really felt as though that was the end of your life. I mean, there was one ferry at that time. It went backwards and forwards, and I think it was only about 3 a day. Is there anyone as old as me here? I don't think there is. But anyway, it was pretty dreary. And I remember, for instance, there was a watch committee. That takes us all back. The watch committee had to keep an eye on the morals of the place. Somebody's nodding, he remembers. And this watch committee, I remember, insisted we had some front class pictures, and guns had to be concealed. You had to put a bit of sticking plaster over guns because that was considered too dangerous. And I remember the head of our company, the director, got a letter from the watch committee saying, would Miss Hancock refrain from wearing shorts in the high street? I promise you, I had these short shorts and I had to start wearing them. That's what it was like in Shanklin in those days. And I remember actors always liked to have a drink after the show, and of course there was nowhere open except, and I'm now going to give a secret away, Daishies. Used to stay open after hours. And all the people that worked in the profession used to go to Daishies and get absolutely high-eyed. And then after that, I did several seasons at Shanklin. Then Cyril Fletcher asked me to be his soubrette on the end of the pier at Sandown. So 2 seasons in a show called Masquerade. And there was 5 changes of programme, I remember. And the opening number went, Masquerade is here tonight, and in the morning. And I never knew any more. The whole of the seasons, I know, because I was so busy learning all the lines for the 5 programmes, and everybody else was singing, so I can't be bothered. And we used to have these things called shaners, which were big sort of scenes where there was a cowboy shaner, and there was a country shaner, and you all did songs, and a London, a Cockney shaner. And I remember I was Carmen Miranda in the South American shaner, and one particular programme, I was utterly confused. I didn't know what show we were in, and I came on going, yay, conga, and it was the Cockney shaner. And there I was with this, and I remember Cyril. Totally amazing. But I have to say I'm grateful to the island because I really did learn my trade here. I did a show a week, different ones every day, and it really was a lesson for any young actor.
But what would actors do without scriptwriters? The Isle of Wight's best-known scriptwriter is undoubtedly Ray Allen, who penned the hit 1970s TV series Some Mothers Do Have 'Em. Success was a long time coming for this native of Ryde. He had to take menial jobs for many years to help pay his way, including one at a Shanklin cinema.
When I was still struggling to break in with my writing, I got to know Shanklin very well because I had a morning job at the Regal Cinema at Shanklin, and I was there for about 4.5 years. I used to get very envious because just up the road, of course, was Shanklin Theatre, and there were all the stars there, all the comedians. It was a lovely theatre, it always has been. I have one embarrassing moment connected with it because I used to love the musicals they put on, and one of my favourite musicals was The Boyfriend, and I've always lived in Ryde, don't have a car, so I was waiting for the train to go to Shanklin to see the last night of The Boyfriend, and I remember the train came in from the pier head and there were crowds of people got off, and someone shouted across and said, "Oh Ray, can I have a word with you?" And I said, "I'm sorry, I can't stop. I'm just off the Shanklin to see the boyfriend. But yeah, they did some lovely shows there, and it's a lovely atmosphere. And I just hope it keeps going for many years to come. But someone once asked me if I had any material on the Shanklin Theatre, if I'd written for it. Well, actually, apparently some of my jokes were, but I didn't realise it because at the time I was working at the cinema, I was sending sketches and one-liners away, and the son of one of the cleaners told me that, because I was cleaning the cinema at the time, and he said, "Oh, that joke you told me," he said, "you pinched that from Dick Emery, didn't you?" And I said, "No," and he said, and then the following week there was another comedian, he said I'd pinched it from him. And what I later discovered was that the stars of the show at Shanklin, all the comedians, used to go after the show to go to this little cafe at the high street. And one of the staff at the Regal used to go in there and tell them all the jokes he'd heard from me. And apparently some of them were using them on the stage, so I never got paid for them, but yes, it took me a long time to break in as a writer. I was writing for 15 years before I sold anything. And I eventually ended up cleaning the toilets at the Regal Cinema. And then one morning, I got this letter, and it said, you know, the BBC want to see you about the latest script you've sent in. It was quite strange, really, because I then, of course, I didn't have a phone at home, and I didn't like to use the one in the cinema, so I had to go down to the call box where the bus station was and phone up the BBC from there. And I actually stayed on at the Regal for about a year after I sold my first script. I was commissioned to write 6 more. It was the first script was about a young couple called Frank and Betty Spencer, and they said, "Would you do 6 more?" And they said, remember they said to me, they said, "There's no rush for these, so you know, don't give up your career." They said, "Obviously you have a job, so don't give it up, just carry on writing part-time." And then one of them said, "Oh, by the way, what do you actually do?" Well, I told them at the BBC that I was working for the film industry, whereas in fact I was cleaning the toilets at the cinema. And then this producer said he wanted to contact me about some work, and he asked me for my phone number, and of course I didn't have a phone. And so I told him, I said, "You can always contact me at the Regal at Shanklin." And he thought it was a luxury hotel where I went for coffee. And I said to the staff, if anyone phones asking for me, don't tell them what I do. And a couple of days later there was a call for me, and when I answered it, this man said, "Oh, I'd like to arrange a meeting in London. I wanted to know if you were still interested in doing some more work." And he said, "By the way, before you hang up, could you put me through to the manager?" And I said, "Why? What do you want to talk to him about?" And he said, "Well, the receptionist that answered the phone was very offensive, very rude." He said, "And I'm going to complain." And he said, "I phoned up and I said, is Mr. Raymond Allen, the film writer and television star there?" And she said, "Oh yes, he's always here about this time." And he said, "Well, could you page him for me?" And she said, could you phone back in 10 minutes, she said, because he's just mopping out the gents. And he said, and I was quite stunned, he said, "Look, what exactly is the Regal?" And I said, "Well, it's a cinema." And he said, "Well, do you really mop out the gents?" And I said, "Yes, but I'm getting material for a script. I'm doing it for a script." And he said, "How long have you been there?" And I said, 4 years. And he said, "It must be a very long script." I've always liked Shanklin. I think it's one of the most attractive seaside towns on the island, and I've been coming here for years. Shanklin has sort of changed over the years. I remember when I was working at the Regal, they still had Upper Chine School. It was a very famous girls' school, and all the girls would regularly come into the cinema trying to see if they could have any cinema posters to put up in their rooms. But basically, I think Shanklin's one of the towns on the island that has remained basically the same. I remember every morning my first job when I was working at Shanklin was to clean the steps of the cinema, and I'd stand there and look down Regent Street, and it is a lovely place.
Of course, entertainment comes in very different forms. One islander who's achieved considerable fame as a singer is Craig Douglas. He was born Terence Perkins to a Newport dairy farmer and known as the Singing Milkman. Although his greatest fame came in the late 1950s and early 1960s, he still enjoys a considerable following.
I used to work on my uncle's farm on the Isle of Wight, and one day I got home from school and my mother said, "There's a letter for you." And I said, "A letter?" It's the first letter I'd ever received in my life. And I opened it up and it was from the manager of the local cinema, Medina. And he said, "Could you let me know on Sunday what song you're going to sing in the talent competition?" I said to Mother, "What's all this about?" She said, "Oh, I decided to put your name down for it." And I thought, well, I'll go in for it with a bit of fun. And went down there and I won the heat. I sang a song called Love Letters in the Sand, which is a Pat Boone number. And then the final was in the November. And I thought, I don't know what to do about this. And then I spoke to my pianist on the Isle of Wight, Teddy Foster his name was. And we decided, because it was near Christmas, to do Mary's Boy Child, which is a lovely Christmas song. Of course, it was so different to everybody else that I won down hands and foot. It was marvellous, terrific. And I won a £5. And I think my mate and two of others went out and had a meal or something in those days. It wouldn't have cost a £5, that's for sure. And things sort of went on from there. Of course, when I did the talent competition, an Asian in London and his wife came down to see me, and the wife said, "You know, we got another Perry Como here, I think," and that's how it all started, really. And then, 6 months later, I was up in London, and I was having singing lessons and so forth, and getting to know London. Yeah, so the first 6-5 special show I did frightened the life out of me because it was actually live. And when Pete Murray, the disc jockey, introduced me, and there's a little light that went on the camera, a little red light, and I thought, well, that's it. And it was live, and I thought, if I mess this song up, millions of people are not going to be very happy. But we sort of got over it, actually, and I ended up actually doing 6-5 specials, because a lot of people wrote in, because we had a lot of rock and rollers on the show. A lot of people wrote in and said how lovely it is to hear someone like Craig Douglas singing a ballad song and we can hear all the words, whereas you get a rock and roller and you can't hear a word. And so I got another 6 of those, and then a record came along and so forth, and everything started going from there. And then funnily enough, the first show I think I did coming back home was in the Isle of Wight, which we used to do Sandown and Shanklin, and people like Tommy Trinder and, as you say, Arthur Askey, and I did one with Vince Hill as well. And we used to swap over, get into a taxi. So I'd finish the first half at Sandown, he'd finish the first half at Shanklin, then we'll switch over. And it was good fun, actually. They were always on a Sunday, because it was a Sunday concert. And maybe I was doing a summer season, maybe, say, in Weston-super-Mare. So on the Saturday night, I'd finish the show Weston-super-Mare, drive over to the Isle of Wight on the Sunday, do the show, drive back to Weston-super-Mare on the Monday, and I was there for about 18 weeks. So it was hard work, but thoroughly enjoyable. Good old variety days, that's what I like.
One of my favourite mates on the island, of course, is Craig Douglas. We're fellow water rats, and it was so wonderful. I mean, he's had a bit of a rough time recently, but it was wonderful to see him do a one-nighter here the other night. And if we can, I mean, bless him, Craig, I first worked with him in pantomime about 300 years ago. I played the dame and he played the good-looking prince. And he's still good-looking and I'm still playing dames, but there you go.
My first sight of Craig Douglas was in the late 50s, and I was quite surprised to see him because I'd seen him in a talent show at Ryde, And I think a couple of days later I saw him in Newport. He was delivering the milk. And I had no, you know, he was a wonderful singer, but it was lovely that he went on to such great success.
I could find many superlatives to describe Shanklin, but let's leave the final words to Craig and Melvin.
Yeah, I've always liked Shanklin. I mean, Ventnor's okay, but it's very hilly, especially at my age now, that's for sure. But Shanklin, it's got a nice atmosphere about it, I think. Like most of the places around the Isle of Wight, surrounded by water, on the beaches and so forth, I think it's terrific, wonderful.
Now, we came over to the island because we fostered children, and it's so nice to come to a place where strangers say, hello, how are you? You know, I mean, in London they do that, but they're picking your pocket at the same time. And what I like about the fact is, I love the winter here, because I've got a little dog. A Frischambris, is it? I don't know, is that what they call them? Yeah, and I walk along the seafront, and you don't see anybody. Nobody, it's wonderful. Then in the summer there's millions of people packed. Maybe one day I'll come and play here, do a one-nighter here. That'd be nice, wouldn't it? Cheers.